As we enter a new phase of the pandemic, a growing number of Americans report feeling comfortable with traveling overseas again. While the United States is a leader in the vaccine rollout, many of the places Americans want to travel to, including several Spanish-speaking ones, have much lower vaccination rates. This comes as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said people who are fully vaccinated make for low-risk international travelers, but they've also issued advisories for certain countries still grappling with the virus. Joining us to talk about travel to Latino and Spanish-speaking places and how you can be a thoughtful tourist are Jeanette Ceja, a California-based travel journalist and travel advisor, and Aresha Martinez-Cardoso, a researcher in public health and associate professor at the University of Chicago. First of all, thank you both for joining us right now. Now, we understand there's a pandemic record. 43% of Americans say they would not feel guilty for traveling right now. This, according to data from destination analysts. About 1 in 10 people have plans in place to travel overseas. Jeanette, first off, where are Americans traveling to? And let's focus a little bit on Latin America and Spanish-speaking places.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on today. It's so exciting. Some of the places that American travelers have been going to since the pandemic really started has been Mexico. Mexico has continued to stay open and is still open to this day. However, Mexico has been very good in certain areas, for example, Cabo San Lucas, about how they've been handling capping hotel stays, capping tours, really keep in mind how tourists should wear masks as well as locals. So Mexico has definitely been an international destination that a lot of American travelers have been going to. Costa Rica is open for American tourists as well. Costa Rica does require American tourists to have a proof of medical insurance. Some other countries that are open as well are Guatemala, Colombia, El Salvador, for example. So these are some of the Latin American countries that Americans can go to at this moment.
Okay, now we're going to get back to how we can be thoughtful tourists in places like those, but we want to take a listen to Dr. Susan Lopez from Rush University Medical Center. She has some advice for those traveling to places like Mexico that she gave to her patients, and most importantly, she says make sure you wear a mask and social distance when you are on their land as new variants emerge.
It also means that there's a possibility that someone from somewhere else could bring a different strain from somewhere else to that country. So making sure that they are using those masks to protect those that they're visiting as well.
Now, Aresha, let's turn to you next. Guidance appears to give the okay to those who are fully vaccinated for travel. Does that mean that we should?
Yeah, that's a decision that I think everyone has to make on a case-by-case basis. The CDC has issued guidelines on where they suggest folks should travel and their own recommendations. My advice would be to try to pick a zone 1, 2, or 3 destination and avoid 4 or 5 zones. Of course, that means that rules out a lot of Latin America. But if you do decide to travel, I would suggest that folks aim to be fully vaccinated, waiting your 2-week waiting period time, and also get a test when you return. Continue to mask, social distance, and limit your interactions, as Dr. Lopez suggested. And again, we're going to speak on this a little bit later, but really travel mindfully, limit your itinerary, try to stay and shop local, and get comfortable with no's, right? You can't come in, we can't have you, your size of group within the restaurant. We have to limit capacity and just being mindful and adhering to the recommendations and the guidelines that are set forth by the countries that you're visiting.
And speaking of guidelines, Jeanette, what guidance are you seeing from Latin American countries that they have for travelers? For instance, quarantine or testing requirements or proof of vaccination?
Most of the countries in Latin America, for example, that are open to American tourists do require a negative COVID test proof within 72 hours to enter their country. Some countries are a little more strict than others. And for example, Mexico, you really all need to show that. But it really just depends. It's a case by case, country by country, and it's fluid. So it's ever changing. Some countries add on restrictions, some take them away. It depends on the current status of the pandemic in that country, as well as what you were talking about earlier, being mindful. I also advise travelers, if they're going to go to an international country where the vaccines aren't widely available like they are in the US, if you can go fully vaccinated, but still bring your PPE gear, your mask, your hand sanitizer, your gloves, and be mindful of the country that you're going. Do your due diligence, your research. What is the current status? What are the requirements? And like the word, I really like the word mindful. Be mindful of the locals that you're going to go visit, because they may not have the same accessibility to the vaccines like we have.
And we want to make sure we have time to get to a few more questions here. Aresha, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but is it possible that even fully vaccinated Americans can have a negative impact by visiting countries that may not be quite there yet?
Yeah, this is a good question. We do know, based on the best science that we have available, that vaccination does reduce not only your own risk of getting COVID, but transmitting COVID, but it's not 100% surefire guarantee. So that's why we want to make sure to be doing all of the social distancing and COVID guidelines to make sure that we protect others, even though we might be protected more ourselves. There's also some concerns that the current vaccines that we have now don't protect the same way against the variants that we do know of, as well as the variants that we might not be aware of yet, right? So again, making sure to mask up, social distance, all of those good things. And the last thing I'll say is we have to also be concerned about kids, right? Kids don't have access to vaccines yet, particularly the young ones. And what we also know is that while kids don't get as sick as often with COVID, there's some evidence that they are more likely to spread the vaccine, that they have more of a viral load is what we call it. And so we just have to be extra careful if we do just travel our kids, make sure. So encouraging them to do all the same things that we are, and maybe just hold off on those family vacations, because we don't want to unwittingly spread COVID through our kids without and exacerbate health inequities within the countries that we're trying to visit.
Aresha, to you now, tell us what happens if someone from the United States does get COVID-19 while they're overseas.
Yeah, good question. And we hope this doesn't happen. But if it does, first of all, communicate with your hotel to try to figure out extended travel arrangements, as well as all of your travel partners. It might be a good idea to contact the embassy to figure out if there's any sort of arrangements that they have set up for those who are traveling internationally, and really adhere to the social distancing and the quarantine guidelines. I know it's tough to be stuck in another country, but it really protects you and others if you avoid traveling yourself as well as your entire group, and making sure not to come home until you get tested and you test negative. So that's basically what I would suggest folks do.
Well, that was a thoughtful answer. We only have about a minute left here. So, Jeanette, I want to round out. Final question. I want to hear from you on this sort of double-edged sword when it comes to tourism. Despite the risks, a lot of economies do rely on travel, which, as we know, has been devastated during the pandemic. How do you reconcile that?
Yes, there are a lot of countries and locals who depend on tourism. One of the ways that you can support, even from your home or while you're planning a trip, is you can book your hotel stays for the future. And if you need to change the dates, most hotels will honor that and give you some kind of credit. So you can support local hotels as well. Tours are also doing that, where you can buy gift cards, you can do virtual tours. So even when you're in the planning stages, there's still many ways that travelers can support the locals abroad.
And our thanks to Jeanette Ceja and Aresha Martinez-Cardoso. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.